What are the NFC South depth chart updates you need to know for fantasy football in the offseason following free agency? It's time to catch you up on all four teams, the Falcons, Saints, Panthers, and Bucks, as we start another edition of Locked On Fantasy Football.
Are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL and fantasy football for sportingnews.com. We're looking at the depth charts updated here for all the teams. We're going division by division to tell you what the teams are looking like now from the offensive positions following free agency and heading up for the draft and what their plans might be there to continue to build on their rosters here. So we're getting to every team. We've taken care of half of the NFC. We've looked at the NFC East teams, the NFC North teams. Now we're going to turn our attention to the NFC South on today's show. Yeah, so all four teams changing their starting quarterbacks and really their backup situations here. So interesting division for sure to explore. There's also some changes that are key that we need to look at: running back, wide receiver, tight end, the offensive line. So we'll get to all these teams in order: Atlanta, Carolina, New Orleans, and Tampa Bay on today's show. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today. We're free and available to you wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe and follow us for free on YouTube and any place you listen. And I also have to tell you, this episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. All right, let's dive right in to the Atlanta Falcons, the first team in the spotlight here. We know Marcus Mariota was done at the end of last year. They moved on from him. He goes and signs with the Eagles as their new backup, replacing Gardner Minshew. The Falcons, however, not operating without a net with Desmond Ridder here. They're promising second-year quarterback. They're going to give him a shot here to start in the Arthur Smith offense. They go out and get the Commanders' Taylor Heinicke. The Commanders make some wholesale changes there with Sam Howell now being the starter, Jacoby Brissett as that contingency plan. So they cut Carson Wentz, Taylor Heinicke becomes available. So good pickup there. He's a mobile guy that can move around, so he can control some of that part of the offense here for Smith should he have to come in for Ridder. He's also very seasoned now. He's got plenty of starts under his belt, so I like that for sure. And maybe if Ridder struggles a little bit, Heinicke is the kind of the fallback here to be productive. And really, we're not situations that are lesser quarterbacks. We're not banging the table for them in fantasy except for occasional streaming options based on matchups. We're looking for the best facilitator. We just want Ridder or Heinicke, that final decision to be right here for Arthur Smith. But I would say lean toward Ridder just to see what he's got here so they know if they have to look and draft a franchise quarterback next year. But Heinicke is on alert because, again, he's filled in really nicely there in Washington when they had Howell and Wentz. So something to keep in mind that he's a capable starter and a good facilitator of our playmakers. Logan Woodside, he was in Tennessee with Arthur Smith. He's now the third stringer, your developmental guy, still hanging around in the league. Now let's look at the running back. Tyler Algier, breakout second half for the rookie, really came on strong despite having limited touches and working here. Cordell Patterson fading here. They're bringing him back for one more year. But we'll see about that one. Caleb Huntley was battling injuries as well. That opened things up for Algier. And you have Avery Williams running up the depth chart. So I could definitely see the Falcons adding a back to this mix, maybe a little bit of a explosive back to complement Algier. He can turn out some chunk runs. It's a very good offensive line. We know that. So he's going to get all the yards that are maximized there. And that's what you want. So Algier comes in as a very two, more so, I'd say, leaning in standard and half-point leagues than more half-point and full PPR leagues with Algier. But that opportunity should continue to knock here for the young power back out of BYU. All right, let's move to wide receiver here. And Drake London, clearly number one with the bullet here. Calvin Ridley, that deal to the Jaguars became official as he was reinstated into the league. So Drake London, their first-round pick, the first wide receiver off the board last year, surprised many, but now has a great opportunity to be the clear-cut number one here. Their number two right now is Mac Hollins. They signed him away from the Raiders, so he's going to be their outside threat. And Olamide Zaccheaus is still in the mix for slot, and Frank Darby is their fourth receiver. So the Falcons should be in the market for thinking about a receiver. I don't think they'll take one in the first round early. I think they need defensive help, but I think they could definitely use some wide receiver depth here behind London and Hollins and Zaccheaus. And again, the weapons are not too bad when you think about tight end as well, but I think they could definitely use an upgrade. If London takes a big step, that's going to be key here. And Hollins, we know, can make a few big plays on the outside. At tight end, you have Kyle Pitts getting some help from Jonas Smith. So he comes back into the Titans offense style here from his days with the Patriots. Didn't stay healthy there, got outplayed by Hunter Henry. So gets a good chance here to use 12 personnel. Arthur Smith did do that a lot in his final year at Tennessee. So I think you'll see using two tight ends given the way the wide receivers are right now. And Jonas is a capable athlete and receiver there. He just gives them a little bit better inline option than Kyle Pitts. And they were dependent on Pitts to do a lot of that dirty work, and that's what hurt him a little bit with his production on top of being a run-heavy team with questionable quarterback play. They also had to rely on Pitts on his other skills here. So Jonas Smith is going to take the blocking pressure off Pitts. Parker Hesse and Philippe Franks, the converted Arkansas quarterback by way of Florida, he's their fourth option there as well. So interesting tight end move here, a little bit underrated, but getting Smith is going to help open things up for Pitts more in the passing game. And the young quarterback, you figure Ridder and London is going to – those two guys are going to be busy. He's going to pepper Pitts as well with targets. So London Pitts could really be dominating targets. And if Ridder or Heineke is somewhat competent here, they could be big volume-based seasons for both of the primary targets here for Atlanta. The final thing we're looking at is the offensive line. They were able to lock up Chris Lindstrom and Caleb McGarry on the right side. So two first-round picks they really liked. You got Jake Matthews holding the fort still, longtime left tackle, Jalen Mayfield. Drew Dahlman is their center. So overall, this offensive line is very good. It's a lot like the Bears, with a little bit better with run blocking, really superior run blocking group than it is in pass protection, but it's capable and it's not going to be a detriment to either Ridder or Heineke here this season. All right, there you have a look at the Falcons and their latest depth chart offensively here after free agency. We did tell you at the top that this episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by FanDuel, and it's an exciting time of the year. The tournament is heating up. We're into the Sweet 16 of March Madness, and now's the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, super easy to use, and you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and freeze drinks. A lot of exciting teams left in the bracket. The stakes are raised here. The players are going to come through. You can look at the player points, rebounds, and assists if you want to play the props there. And so many more exclusive bets that you can find for NBA as well. With the 2x3, you can check out if a three-pointer situation is going to happen in the first 3 minutes. You get paid out that way as well. Plus, FanDuel lets you even buy your bets for a chance of bigger payout with the same game parlay. So it's not the NFL, but a lot of other stuff is going on. So don't miss a chance to get your bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockdown. That's FanDuel.com/lockdown to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA, as well as a sponsor here of Locked On Fantasy Football. Okay, let's continue the show here and look at what's going on. The teams in the NFC South, their updated depth charts. We'll hit the Carolina and New Orleans here. They come up next in the alphabetical order. So the Panthers didn't have a quarterback under contract for a while. Matt Corral was it, but now they have Andy Dalton as their number one, and Jacob Eason following Frank Reich from Indianapolis. He was once, there we know, as a promising guy, but now he's a developmental still third stringer for the Colts. Maybe he can do for the Panthers and following that offense. And when you look at Andy Dalton, again, he's a bridge quarterback. He's been that way for a while. He's transitioned pretty well the past few years from Dallas to Chicago to New Orleans. So he has that role here for the number one overall pick. Right now, we're leading C.J. Stroud is going to finish this puzzle here as the number one quarterback, but will not be surprised if it's Bryce Young or Anthony Richardson. So we know they're just holding the pocket warm here for that number one overall pick. And Dalton would make sense to use as a bridge quarterback if that selection is not ready. It's safe it's Anthony Richardson and needs time to develop. Andy Dalton will be your Panthers starting quarterback. Where if it's more Stroud or Young, I think from day one, week one, you'd see those guys as a starting quarterback in Carolina. Let's go to running back. Change there for sure. We had the big change last year when Christian McCaffrey was traded from Carolina to San Francisco. Donta Foreman was a fine replacement for 1 year, but they move on again to Miles Sanders. So Miles Sanders leaves the NFC champion Eagles. He signs a nice deal with the Panthers, so he's their lead power back. Chuba Hubbard returns as their change of pace receiving style back here. Sanders didn't catch a lot of passes in Philadelphia. Same thing with Foreman in Carolina. So there's a direct transition there that Sanders can make. Raheem Blackshear showed some flashes last year. He's number 3. Spencer Brown rounds things out as number 4. Big changes at wide receiver also for the Panthers. No more DJ Moore. He was shipped off to Chicago in the deal to get the number 1 overall pick here. So DJ Moore's gone. Adam Thielen signed. So into his 30s, Adam Thielen gets a pretty hefty contract from the Panthers to be their number 1. He's an interesting number 1 because he's mainly a big slot guy, can score in the red zone. But I don't think he has those number 1 super qualities right now anymore at his older age. A big, nice, big security blanket target for that rookie quarterback. But again, I don't know how productive this passing game is going to be. And it's an interesting offense overall with all the changes with the Wright and Thomas Brown of the Rams, adding Sanders instead of Foreman, Thielen instead of Moore. There's definitely a sense of a downgrade there and trying to figure things out because there's a lot of newness on this team. All right, after Adam Thielen, you have Terrace Marshall Jr. He's flashed. This could be an opportunity here for him to establish himself as a number 1, and he's got that LSU pedigree that you've had from Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. Shi Smith comes in at number 3. But interesting names after that. Laviska Shenault, the former Jaguars receiver they got in a trade. He's still hanging around, so he could have a big value in the slot or outside if they put Adam Thielen in the big slot. And then Preston Williams. Remember him? He had a flash there with the Dolphins. He had knee injuries, but getting another shot here is a number 5, and it's a pretty weak depth chart. So we'll see if the Panthers can go after a wide receiver. I mean, they're handcuffed a little bit with their draft picks here, but not the greatest receiver, especially if you're relying on an aging Thielen as your number 1. All right, we look at tight end. Big changes there, too. So you got a new starting tight end in Hayden Hurst. He gets signed to South Carolina product there, first-round pick of the Ravens. So it was on the Falcons for a while, and got traded there and then moved on to the Bengals. Was pretty effective at times when he was needed in the passing game for Joe Burrow. So now he's a security blanket for another number 1 overall pick, we assume. So that's what you get. Thielen and Hurst, they can scheme themselves open, get big targets, bodies. And that's exactly why I think the Panthers acquired both of these guys. Offensive line is pointing upward here. Ike Ekonwo was paid off with the left tackle, the rookie first round for last year. Bradley Bozeman, a revelation at center. He's back. You have Taylor Bolton holding down right tackle. You have Brady Christensen, good pedigree there, left guard, and Austin Corbett holding down right guard. So pretty good offensive line starting to develop in Carolina, which is great going forward with the young quarterback. All right, let's go from Carolina and stay in the dirty South and go to New Orleans. We have Derek Carr being the new starting quarterback for the Saints. They tried to trade for him, but they ended up just signing him there as the Raiders released him. So it made a lot of sense that he's reunited with Dennis Allen, his first NFL coach, while with the Raiders in 2014. So made a lot of sense to rekindle that relationship. It did have some success early. So they're looking at that, especially defensive mind and offensive mind. So Derek Carr, new clear-cut starter for the Saints. Jameis Winston is hanging around as the number 2. So it's kind of settling in that role the way that Mariota is as well. Taysom Hill is still on the depth chart, listed as the number 3 quarterback, but Jake Luton is on the team as well, the former Jaguar. He's at number 4. Let's go to running back here. Alvin Kamara has a new company. They're going to move on from Mark Ingram here, maybe retiring. Jamal Williams, they splash and splurge to get him a little bit after his big touchdown here in Detroit. So trying to recreate that power situation to help Alvin Kamara in the red zone, take some pressure off him with the touches, and as he gets a little bit older, make him more tuned into the passing game. So Kamara and Williams, a familiar 1-2 punch in New Orleans with offense we know for the pass with Kamara and Ingram. You have Dwayne Washington and Eno Benjamin. Remember him, the Cardinals one-time promised guy there that was going to do some things, and he got dealt here. So Benjamin's still hanging on, but Kamara and Williams are going to be the 1-2 punch here. There's things at wide receiver, but the main guys are there. Chris Olave, Michael Thomas, Rashid Shaheed after a big year last year. So he kind of displaced Marcus Callaway. Thomas back in the fold. I think Derek Carr is a good quarterback for him at the short and intermediate routes. And Chris Olave established already in year 2 as a number 1. Couple familiar names behind him. Keith Kirkwood, he's bounced around between the Saints and the Panthers. Well, he's back in the Saints here, trying to hold on as the number 4 receiver. And then Traquan Smith, this is probably it for Traquan. I mean, he's had some chances in the past playing off Michael Thomas. It just has not played out as the number 2 receiver. It's been an occasional big play threat out of the slot. But now he's buried on this depth chart as number 5. Now, at tight end, we have a good same thing that we can look at. Juwan Johnson leading. He got here, so they like him as a red zone threat, key target here as well. Adam Troutman stays as the number 2, and Taysom Hill listed here also as the number 3, like he is at quarterback. Offensive line-wise, you'll see more of a Trevor Penning, nasty street guy that you can put in at left tackle with Northern Iowa prospect. So we'll get to see his full worth here, replacing Terran Armstead. Anders Pete returns as the left guard. Eric McCoy holds things down at center. You have Cesar Ruiz still at right guard, and Ryan Ramczyk, the long-time anchor there. So pretty good offensive line as well. So that's a good thing about this division. You have a lot of good offensive line play to help the offensive skills guys, and it definitely carries through with these 3 teams, Atlanta, Carolina, and New Orleans. We'll get to the Buccaneers in our final segment here on Locked On Fantasy Football. Make sure to check out Locked On NFL Draft here on the network, catching up on all the pro days, all the action coming out of the combine. They're now turning the corner to the final month of preparation for the first round of the NFL Draft on April 27th. So check out those guys. Locked On NFL Draft brings you great analysis of the prospects and teams as the clock starts to tick for the first round. All right, it is time to close the show here on Locked On Fantasy Football with a look at the Buccaneers depth chart as we look at the NFC South depth chart updates you need to know for fantasy football. Subscribe and follow for free wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, the Buccaneers, big change at quarterback. Tom Brady finally rides off the sunset. This time the official retirement is official. He did not come back, so that's it. Baker Mayfield was signed, and that definitely confirmed the Bucs are moving on. So Baker Mayfield is your new starting quarterback leader here. Kyle Trask, for the second-round pick of Florida a couple years ago. Still developing, maybe not a great sign for Trask, but Baker Mayfield might actually step into a very good situation. This is the same environment, same offense with Dave Canales coming over from the Seahawks that made Geno Smith a comeback player of the year. So this might be a good formula for Mayfield to get back on track in his NFL career. I mean, the Bucs are picking late still because they're a playoff team with Brady, so they're not going to get a shot at one of those top first-round quarterbacks. So really looking at this as Mayfield's team right now, job to lose ahead of Trask. Now, running backs, they've moved on from Leonard Fournette, so Rachaad White gets a shot here in the new offense led by Canales. So that's good because he helped Kenneth Walker have a big year on that offensive staff in Seattle. So White in year 2 has a big opportunity here with no more Fournette. That's great for him. And you feel good about White having a big role as long as they don't take a running back, such as Bijan Robinson or Jahmyr Gibbs in the first round, because you have Chase Edmonds as your number 2. You got Keyshawn Vaughn still hanging on as number 3. And remember Patrick Laird, the former Dolphin? Well, he's now 4th on their depth chart. So pretty slim pickings after that. Edmonds has bounced around. I mean, he was on 2 teams last year. He was signed big by the Dolphins. He ended up with the Broncos. He gets cut. This is the sport team, the former Cardinal. So he's just a guy now with a little bit of change of pace. You've got Keyshawn Vaughn there. Has had his moments, but never been able to explode, and they drafted White despite of that. Laird just hanging on as kind of a fullback hybrid. At wide receiver, they could be in the market to take that position instead if it's not Robinson or Gibbs in the first round, because they got Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Russell Gage, and nothing else really. They moved on from Scotty Miller. There's no more Rashad Perryman. There's no more Antonio Brown. He's long gone. Tyler Johnson was released a couple of years ago. So that's it for the Bucs. So they could definitely be in the market. They can't go in with just Evans and Gage on the outside for 11 personnel and Godwin in the slot. They got to get some depth there, so something to look at. The Bucs also said goodbye, like they did to Tom Brady and Leonard Fournette, to Cameron Brate. So Cameron Brate is off. So he follows Rob Gronkowski off this roster. Gronk retired, of course, for sure. Brate Davis had to move on, and they had Cade Otton, so that's a good opportunity for him, especially with the wide receiver thin nature. They have Coke Keith as the backup tight end, another guy they drafted behind Otton. So those two guys figured to work in 12 personnel when they use it. And then your third tight end there is David Wells. So Otton was a big opportunity here, as well as Rashad White, based on Fournette and Brate no longer being Buccaneers. Unfortunately, they also took a big hit releasing a key player from their offensive line. Donovan Smith, the left tackle, is gone. So they had to cut him for salary cap purposes. So it's tough up front. I mean, they already took some hits last year with Alex Kappa. They're leaving for the Bengals, and you had Ali Marpet decide to retire. So themselves last year. Tristan Wirfs flips from right tackle to left tackle. Makes a lot of sense to do that. He's a dominant blocker. Nick Leverett is your left guard. Ryan Jensen still hanging on as a center. We wonder how much longer with Brady now in the mix. Brandon Walton, just a name there at right guard. And Justin School is your right tackle. So definitely the Bucs could upgrade their offensive line following the release of Smith and some of the personnel hits that they've taken here in the past couple years. But definitely big transition, right? You have Mayfield in for Brady, White in for Fournette. You got Otton in for Brady. And now you got Wirfs taking over for Smith. So a lot of big changes. The Buccaneers, we saved the team with the most changes for last. But really, this whole division in the NFC South, full of sweeping change. And we need to keep up with it. The coaching, personnel, everything is changing the course of fantasy football here. So a lot of interesting things to look at with these four teams as we move forward in the offseason. Thanks again for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Our next episode will focus, of course, on the NFC West depth chart. So look at the Cardinals and 49ers, Seahawks, Rams, see what they've done in free agency, what they could still do in the draft, what's that looking like for fantasy football. We'll do that for you. Make your second listen Locked On NFL Scouting with the draft dudes from free agency, the draft, salary cap management, and more. Join NFL experts Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino as they take you through what it's like to build a successful NFL franchise every Monday through Friday. Find Locked On NFL Scouting with the draft dudes wherever you get your podcasts on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. For Locked On Fantasy Football, this has been Vinnie Iyer. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll check you out there to look at the NFC West depth chart.